The morning was an absolute mess. Our alarm didn't go off, thanks to a power outage during the night, which meant both my wife and I were rushing to get ready for work. She was in much more of a hurry than I was, considering her office was further, and she always liked to get there early. My job didn't start until 9 a.m., and it was only a short drive away, so I wasn't feeling the pressure as much. Normally, before heading out, she'd check her emails, an obsessive little ritual of hers, but today, she was too distracted by the rush and left her computer open. As I was about to turn it off for her, something caught my eye. The subject line of an email, "Have a nice trip." My stomach tightened as I clicked it open, curiosity getting the best of me. Inside the email, it was all laid out, plain as day. My wife had been planning a trip to Okinawa, Japan with another man while I was away on business. It felt like the ground was crumbling under me. How could this happen? What kind of person would go behind their partner's back like this? I felt betrayed, gutted, and all kinds of other things I couldn't even begin to put into words. Let me step back a second. My wife, Allison, and I met through mutual friends about 12 years ago. We were both into fitness and healthy living, and over time, what started as a strong friendship blossomed into romance. Allison was a yoga instructor and personal trainer, and I was climbing the ladder in marketing, hoping for a big break soon. We shared a lot in common: hiking, biking, running. At first glance, we seemed like a great match. She's about 5 feet 6 inches, with long brown hair and brown eyes, and I'm a bit taller, around 6 feet 3 inches, with blonde hair and blue eyes, outdoorsy types who looked good together. It wasn't love at first sight, but we had something solid that eventually turned into marriage. I thought things were going well. But this email told a different story. Apparently, she'd been planning this little romantic getaway with a guy named Brian, someone I had never even heard of before. They had been in touch for months, exchanging plans while I was preparing for my business trip, which was supposed to be a big deal for my career. Landing a major contract was on the line, and this could have been a game changer for me, professionally. Instead, all I could think about was how my wife was getting ready to spend a vacation with another man behind my back. Anger started to creep in, fast and hard. I wasn't the kind of guy to jump to conclusions or lose control, but this was different. I couldn't just sit there and let it go. I wanted answers. I needed to know who this Brian guy was, how long this had been going on, and most importantly, why. Our marriage didn't seem troubled. We had a healthy relationship in every way, or so I thought. What drove her to this? Was there something I missed? Before leaving for work, I copied all the emails onto a thumb drive. I'd look into it later. As I shut down her computer and headed out, my mind was spinning. I couldn't focus on anything else. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. I wanted to make her pay, make both of them pay. I'm not usually one for revenge, but this was an exception. As I sat at my desk, pretending to work, I started planning. I needed to know more about Brian, and I needed to figure out how to ruin their little vacation. I didn't want physical violence or anything extreme, I just wanted them humiliated, and for her to feel the same pain I was feeling. For the rest of the day, I juggled work and my revenge plan. I stayed late at the office, drafting ideas on how to expose their affair without getting myself into too much trouble. If I got caught, it could spell disaster for my career and possibly even jail time. But that didn't stop me. I was determined to make them both pay. Over the next few days, I made some careful moves. I bought a couple of disposable cell phones, paid in cash, and picked up a cheap laptop that I could use away from home. I didn't want anything tracing back to me. I also installed small wireless cameras and microphones in the house, places where I thought they'd talk. It was risky, but I figured it was my best shot at catching them. At home, I acted like everything was fine. I smiled, I kissed her, I played the part of the loving husband, all while I was seething inside. It wasn't easy, but after a while, I got better at it. I even reached out to an old friend from college, someone who could help me with this. Steve, or Bulldog as we used to call him, was the guy who knew how to get things done back in the day. After some small talk, I suggested we meet up in person. He agreed. Meanwhile, the cameras I had set up didn't show much at first. I thought maybe they were meeting somewhere else. But a week later, the footage revealed everything I needed to see. They had been together in our home while I was at work. It was disgusting to watch, but I had to sit through it if I wanted more information. The next time they were at the house, it was different. They were just talking about their trip. I caught the flight number, departure time, and all the details I needed. Now, I had enough to move forward with my plan. As they kept making their plans, my fury grew uncontrollable. The thought of hurting them flashed across my mind more than once, but I pushed it aside. I wasn't going to waste my energy on something impulsive like that. No, I wanted them to suffer. I wanted this revenge to stay with them for the rest of their lives. In my mind, I pictured the day when my soon-to-be ex-wife, old and frail, would be lying on her deathbed. I would stroll in with a smile, lean down, and whisper how I had destroyed her little getaway. Then, I'd turn and walk away, leaving her in stunned silence. That day would come, but first, I had a plan to execute. By now, I had gathered more intel on Brian. He and Allison both worked as personal trainers at the same gym. Apparently, Brian had a reputation for going after married women, but he was about to hit a serious snag. He lived close to the gym, in a small, low-key condo complex. I decided to do some surveillance. Taking a day off from work, I told my boss I had personal matters to sort out before my business trip. Armed with a digital camera that had a solid zoom, I staked out his place for a few hours. It was a modest 2-bedroom setup, and his neighbors seemed to be away during the day, likely at work. There were no security cameras around, which played right into my hands. I felt a knot of tension as I prepared to meet up with Bulldog, my old college buddy Steve. Asking him for help was the riskiest part of my plan, but I didn't have many other options. If he couldn't deliver, I'd have to find someone else. When I spotted him walking into the restaurant, I waved him over to the quiet corner where I had settled. The place wasn't busy, just a few people having a late lunch. "Long time no see, man," he greeted, though his appearance left a lot to be desired. He looked like he'd been through a lot, rougher than I expected. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought he was an extra on some zombie show. We exchanged some small talk, mostly about our college days and the wild parties Bulldog used to throw. He was the king of the scene back then, but those days had clearly taken their toll. He looked about 15 years older than he was. I didn't waste time. I told him why I needed him. Bulldog wasn't dumb, and I wanted to make sure I didn't spook him with too much information too soon. I hinted that I was throwing a private event and needed party favors. I passed him a list, trying to keep it casual. I assured him I'd make it worth his while financially. At first, his face lit up with surprise, but then he grinned. He was in, no questions asked. It must have sounded like a wild time to him. He even asked if he could bring another buddy, someone we both knew from back in the day, some guy named Rick. I agreed, as long as they could handle the list. Bulldog wanted cash up front to make the arrangements, so I handed him an envelope stuffed with a few thousand. His eyes widened, but he didn't say much. He confirmed it was more than enough to cover everything and that we'd meet up the next week to exchange the goods. I also gave him one of my burner phone numbers just in case something went wrong. With that settled, we left the restaurant. I needed everything to go smoothly, as the clock was ticking. Allison and Brian's flight was set to leave the day after I was scheduled for my business trip. 2 weeks before the trip, I met with Bulldog again. He came through and got me everything I needed. Now, it was just a matter of timing. 3 days before I was supposed to leave, I left work early and checked Allison's suitcase. She had it all packed for her little romantic getaway. What a thoughtful woman. Carefully, I slipped a few special surprises into her luggage. They were well hidden, so she wouldn't notice them while unpacking, not until it was too late. Then came the riskiest part. Breaking into Brian's place. I knew his schedule well enough by then, so I wasn't worried about him catching me. The tricky part was the actual break-in. I had never done anything like that before. After some research online, I bought a lockpick set and practiced for days, getting the hang of it at home and at work. Turns out, I had a knack for it. Confident in my new skill, I took an extended lunch break from work and drove to his condo. I was able to pick the lock in just over a minute. Wearing latex gloves, I moved quickly and quietly, heading straight for his bedroom. Just like Allison, Brian had his bag packed and ready to go. I couldn't help but grin as I added a few gifts of my own to his suitcase. Before leaving, I went into the kitchen and found a can of coffee. Emptying it into a bowl, I dropped a few packets at the bottom, refilled the can, and put it back exactly as I'd found it. The place looked untouched. Satisfied, I left and returned home. But I wasn't done. A couple of days before my trip, I contacted an old friend, someone with connections. His cousin worked for the TSA at the airport, and I needed to get the flight details into the right hands. I had to be careful, though. This had to be done without leaving any trail that could lead back to me. So, I gave my friend a call, making sure to be vague about where I got my information. I need a favor, but you've got to keep this completely confidential, I told him. I passed along the flight details and Brian's name, carefully leaving out any mention of my wife. Bill agreed to quietly pass the information to his cousin without raising any red flags. Once I was sure everything was in motion, I removed all the cameras and bugs from the house so that no one would ever discover them. I wasn't done yet, though. I left a few extra surprises in Allison's car, just to add to the chaos. The day before my trip, I decided to have a little fun at Allison's expense. When I got home from work, I sat down, wearing an upset expression. Naturally, she noticed. "What's wrong?" she asked, concerned. "Something happened at work today," I replied, sounding dejected. "The clients we were supposed to meet backed out of the meeting, so it looks like I won't be going on the trip after all. The company's losing out on a big opportunity." I was trying hard not to smirk as I watched her face fill with shock and worry. It suddenly became clear, she had likely been banking on me leaving town so she and Brian could head off on their little escape. "Can't they still send you?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I mean, you and your team have worked so hard on this project. It would be a shame to let all that effort go to waste." Her attempt at a guilt trip only stoked the fire inside me. How dare she talk about shame when she clearly had none? But I played along. "Just kidding, honey," I said, chuckling. "The trip's still happening, no worries." Relief washed over her face, and she smiled. "You had me going there for a second. Are you all packed?" "Yep, I just need to throw a few things in my carry-on, and I'm all set." "You won't miss me too much while I'm gone, will you? Any plans while I'm away? Maybe a girls' night or something?" "Nah, nothing like that," she replied smoothly. "I'll just be here, waiting for my dear husband to come home." The words nearly made me laugh out loud. I was too furious to even crack a smile. The next day, Allison drove me to the airport and dropped me off. I leaned in and gave her a long, passionate kiss, my hands cradling her face. It would be the last kiss I'd ever give her, so I wanted it to be memorable. After that, I joined the rest of my team, and we boarded the flight. The ride was smooth, and once we landed and checked into the hotel, I called home using the room phone. No one answered, so I left a message. "Hey, honey, I did something stupid. I left my phone in the cab, so I won't be able to call you until I either get it back or buy a new one. If you need me, just leave a message at the front desk. I'll call you later." Of course, I hadn't actually lost my phone. I just needed a reason not to take her calls. The next day, I turned off my phone completely so I wouldn't be interrupted during meetings with clients. After wrapping up a long day, I returned to the hotel and checked for messages. Nothing. I powered up my phone, expecting at least a few texts from Allison. Still nothing. Maybe they had managed to slip past airport security after all. The following day went even better than expected. The meetings were a success, and we finished early. When I got back to the hotel, several messages were waiting for me on the room phone, one from Allison, one from her father, and one from an ATF agent. That last one made me smile. I checked my cell phone, and sure enough, there were a few messages there too. I listened to the hotel phone messages first. The one from Allison was frantic. "Baby, it's me. I'm in big trouble, and I really need you. Please come home now. Please." Her voice cracked, and the rest of the message was just sobbing. The second message was from her father. "Terry, your wife has been trying to reach you. She's been arrested and needs your help. Call me as soon as you can." The final message was from an ATF agent named Agent Callahan. He introduced himself and mentioned he wanted to discuss Allison's arrest on drug charges. He left his contact information and a few other details. I couldn't help but grin, but I had to maintain my composure around my colleagues. Everything was falling into place, exactly as I had planned. But I still needed to act shocked and surprised, as if I had no idea what was going on. The next morning, I called my boss and informed him that I had a family emergency. I didn't give any specifics, and he agreed to let me step away from the meetings temporarily. He did, however, stress the importance of returning as soon as possible to close the deals with our clients. I assured him I'd be back in no time and caught the first flight home. When I landed, I called Allison's father. "What's going on? I got your message, but I can't believe it. Allison's been arrested on drug charges? She doesn't use anything like that. Did this happen at the gym?" I already knew exactly where the arrest had taken place, but I needed to sell the surprise. "No," her father responded, his voice low and embarrassed. "She was traveling with a friend to Japan, and they were stopped by security. They found some illegal stuff on both of them." "Hold on a second," I said, pretending to be confused. "She told me she was staying home while I was away. Who was this friend she was traveling with? I bet one of her girlfriends talked her into this trip and got her into all this trouble." There was a brief pause on the other end before he replied. "I know it wasn't one of her girlfriends. The important thing is, Terry, she's in serious trouble. She needs you. She loves you, and I know you still care about her." I cut him off mid-sentence. "What aren't you telling me, Bill? Who was she traveling with?" I shouted into the phone, a bit too satisfied with how things were unfolding. There was silence on the other end before he cleared his throat. "She was with a man. Brian, I think his name was. He got arrested too," he admitted. I interrupted again, this time louder. "So you're telling me my wife, your daughter, was flying off to Japan with another man while I was busting my tail at work to make a living, and she gets busted for carrying pills? Is that what you're saying?" I demanded. "Yes, I'm afraid that's exactly what I'm saying," he responded, his voice filled with shame. I took a long, deliberate pause before responding. "All right. I need to talk to her lawyer and this ATF agent, then I'll speak with her. She better have a damn good explanation for why she was about to fly to Japan with another man and had illegal substances on her," I thought, keeping the anger in check. I hung up before he could say another word. When I got home, there were over 20 messages waiting on the answering machine. The first one was my own message about losing my cell phone. The next few were from Allison, hoping I'd check in during my business trip. Several were from Bill, her father, and the rest were from her lawyer, urging me to get in touch as soon as possible. I called the lawyer, but since he wasn't available, I made an appointment for the next morning. Then, I dialed the ATF agent, Callahan, and arranged to meet him downtown later in the day. As I cleaned up and prepared to head out, I couldn't help but mentally go over everything again, checking to make sure I'd covered all my tracks. I didn't want anything leading back to me. Soon enough, I found myself sitting in what looked like an interrogation room. Agent Callahan walked in, carrying a folder under his arm. "Glad you could stop by," he said, taking a seat across from me. "I have a few questions about your wife that I was hoping you could answer." I didn't waste any time. "Listen, as far as I know, my wife has never been involved with any kind of substance. She doesn't even drink much. This has to be a mistake. She's a yoga instructor, for crying out loud. Why would she be mixed up in something illegal?" I tried to sound genuine, but Callahan didn't look up from his folder. "People make dumb choices for all kinds of reasons," he replied, flipping through the pages. "Did you know your wife was flying to Japan with this guy Brian? She told us he was just a friend, but Brian claims it was a romantic getaway. So, do you know Brian? Were you aware your wife was having an affair? Did you know about the pills?" He looked up and stared at me, his gaze sharp. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I didn't know any of this until I spoke to her father this morning. But honestly, I still can't believe it. She must have been manipulated into this. She's too good of a person to get mixed up in something like this, I said carefully. I didn't want to push my luck. This guy probably had a sixth sense for spotting liars. "Well, it looks like you didn't know," he said, his tone almost sympathetic. "But I hate to break it to you, buddy, your wife was cheating on you, and with a drug dealer, no less. We've already searched his place and found more pills. Soon, we'll be searching your home too. You can cooperate and let us in, or we'll just get a warrant. Either way, we're going to be searching your place." I knew Allison's lawyer would tell me not to allow any search, but I was more concerned about protecting myself. It would look better if I wasn't trying to hide anything. So, I agreed. A few hours later, I was back at the house, watching as ATF and FBI agents, along with a couple of dogs, went through everything. They took a few items, including some pill containers Allison had in the medicine cabinet. The next day, I had my meeting with Allison's lawyer. I filled him in on the conversation with Callahan and the search. He wasn't happy. If law enforcement contacts you again, I want to be there before you say anything. Understood, he said, his tone firm. I nodded but was already feeling irritated. Look, let's be clear, I said, leaning in. I want to know everything that led to my wife's arrest. All I know is she was about to fly off to Japan with some guy named Brian. If you or she expects me to help, someone better start explaining how all this happened. Do I make myself clear? He stood his ground. I can't discuss your wife's case with you. That was enough for me. I stood up and walked out without another word. Next, I headed to the jail to see Allison. The visiting area was crowded with inmates and their families or lawyers sitting at round metal tables bolted to the floor. When she walked in, she looked like a shell of herself, wearing an orange jumpsuit, no makeup, her hair pulled back into a tight, messy ponytail. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "Oh, baby, I'm so relieved you're here," she sobbed as she approached the table. I was about to hug her, but a guard quickly intervened, reminding me that there could be no physical contact. Allison cried harder. "It's okay," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We'll figure this mess out. But right now, I need to hear your side of the story. How did you end up flying to Japan with this guy?" Her tears only intensified. "Terry, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "So it's true?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "You were having an affair with this guy Brian? A drug dealer? How could you? Weren't you happy with me? Didn't you love me? I just don't get it, you, him, and the pills. What were you thinking?" I paused, knowing she didn't have an answer for me. "Please believe me, I've always loved you," she pleaded. "It was a mistake. Can you ever forgive me?" I stared at her for a long moment before finally speaking. "Maybe I could have forgiven you, but you shattered my heart, Allison. I can't forgive you. When I leave here, I'm getting a divorce lawyer and changing the locks. I'll send all your things to your parents because I want you out of my life. Don't expect me to be a character witness for you either, because I won't say a single good thing. Goodbye, Allison. I wish you the best." She was still sobbing, begging me to stay, saying she needed me, but I didn't look back. I headed home and started packing her belongings immediately. The next day, I hired a locksmith to change every lock in the house. I didn't stop there, I scheduled a security company to install a high-end system by the end of the week. Within just a few days, I had most of Allison's things packed up and ready to send to her parents' place. She called me several times, but I ignored every single one. I had no desire to hear her voice again. Eventually, I went back to work. We successfully signed those big clients we had been chasing, and it paid off. I got promoted, with a nice salary bump to go with it. Divorcing Allison was surprisingly easy. It was a clean split, no spousal support, and she had to cover all her legal fees from the drug charges. Despite her attempts to reach out, I kept my distance. She didn't go to trial, given the overwhelming evidence. Her lawyer convinced her to take a plea deal, which led to a shorter sentence than what she could have faced. She wasn't happy about it, but it was her only option. Brian fought harder, trying to prove his innocence, but it didn't work. He got 15 years, while Allison got 5. The day of her sentencing, she asked to see me one last time before she went to court. Reluctantly, I agreed. We met at her lawyer's office an hour before her court appearance. When she walked in, her eyes were red and teary. "Terry, I just want you to know that Brian meant nothing to me. You're the one I've always loved, and I always will. I'm truly sorry for everything, for hurting you. I never intended for things to turn out like this. I hope you can forgive me someday," she said, her voice quivering. I sighed and asked the question that had been eating at me. "Allison, I need to understand one thing. Why did you do it? Were you bored? Was I not enough for you? Or was it just the thrill of sneaking around and getting away with it? What was it that made you throw our marriage away?" She looked down for a moment before responding. "I honestly don't know why. Maybe it was the excitement of doing something forbidden. But I've always loved you." I shook my head. "I guess you didn't love me enough. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done it. Allison, I hope this is the last time I have to see you. I don't want to deal with you ever again. Spend your time in prison thinking about what you've lost because you crave some excitement. I'm sure you'll find plenty of thrilling experiences in there, once the other inmates notice you." Her tears flowed freely then, this time mixed with fear. Over the next few years, my life changed for the better. The company grew, and I eventually became a VP. We expanded the business, opening an office in Hartford, and I was chosen to lead it. That meant selling my house and moving to Connecticut, where I settled into a sleek apartment. I received a few letters from Allison early on, but I sent them back, unopened. That part of my life was over. I was ready to move on. It's been 7 years now, and life in Hartford has treated me well. I'm still single, dating casually, and the dating scene here has been enjoyable. I see a new woman every few months, and I have no interest in getting married again. Once was enough to know the risk wasn't worth it. One day, as I was sitting in my office, I got a call from the lobby. My assistant, Joss, walked in. "There's a woman downstairs asking to see you." "She says her name is Allison," Joss said, raising an eyebrow. I paused for a moment before replying. "Send her up, but make sure there are 2 security guards nearby." I quickly wrote down a note and handed it to Joss. "Give me a call a few minutes after you bring her in," I instructed. She glanced at the note and gave me a knowing smile before leaving. A few minutes later, Allison stepped into my office. She looked much older than the last time I saw her, at least 10 years older. She had gained some weight, and not in a flattering way. Her once beautiful, long brown hair was now streaked with gray and frayed at the ends. Her eyes looked tired, with dark bags underneath, and her clothes, though stylish, seemed outdated. As I looked at her, I felt nothing. No love, no hate, not even pity. Just a void. "So, Allison, what brings you here?" I asked calmly. "Terry, I was hoping we could talk," she said, her voice shaky. I felt the need to explain myself. I swear, I had no idea about the drugs. I still don't know how they ended up in my bags. Brian must have slipped them in without me knowing. I'm not into that stuff, never have been. Please believe me. I'm begging you. I leaned back in my chair. "Allison, you destroyed our marriage for a fling, and you made a mockery of everything we had. Why should I believe anything you say now? You went out of your way to find me, just to tell me another lie?" She started crying again. "I love you, Terry. I still do. I want us to be together again. I want to make things right." Just then, my desk phone rang. I picked it up and put it on speaker. "Yes, Joss, what's up?" "Eva called to confirm you should get 4 tickets for the opening. Her parents are coming into town, and they want to meet you." "Let her know I'll buy the 4 tickets," I said. "Also, find out where her parents are staying. I want to send her mother a dozen roses." I ended the call and turned back to Allison. "You were saying?" She blinked, fighting back more tears. "Who's Eva?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, just someone I've been seeing lately. But we're not here to discuss my dating life, are we? You mentioned you still have feelings for me, and while I appreciate that, I need to be clear, I don't feel the same way about you anymore. When your affair with Brian came to light, I was done with us. Now, it's time for you to leave, and I don't want to see you again. Do you understand? I had nothing to do with those drugs, Terry. I swear, I was framed," she cried. "Enough with the lies, Allison. You cheated on me, and you're still lying. I've told security that if you come back, you'll be arrested. Now please go, and don't come back." She nodded through her silent tears. I stood up, escorted her to the door, and watched as the security guards let her out. Joss walked in after a few minutes. "What was that all about?" she asked, curious. "Oh, that? Just me finally done cleaning up the shit from the past."